of Chapter 15. Section 2 is going to deal with the domestic side of the Kennedy administration. The Kennedy presidency is one of the more well-known and studied presidencies in our history, mainly because of the assassination that will occur, obviously, at the end of his presidency. We will talk about that, obviously, at the end of this section, but there are some other things that we need to talk about. This is one of the better sections that I like to teach, so it's kind of a drag that I can't do it live and in person, so we'll just have to obviously make do with this wonderful video that I'm making. So, as you can see, Section 2 is titled Kennedy's New Frontier. This is his domestic agenda. This is what he calls it, his plans for America. But before we get into that, we're going to get into sort of the mystique of the Kennedy name. America obviously doesn't have royalty. And the closest a lot of people would say we've come to royalty is the Kennedy family. Now, a lot of people do not like them. A lot of people do like them. But the Kennedys are a family that Americans have grown to watch. When he was in office, basically his family was really the first sort of young family to be in the White House in a long time. When Kennedy was elected, he was probably about 45. Jackie was younger than him. Jackie was his wife. Jackie was a few years younger than him, so she's in her early 40s, late 30s. They have two young kids at the time of the inauguration. Caroline was 3 or 4. John Jr. was about 1. And so Americans looked at them as their family. Jackie Kennedy was extremely popular, especially for her sense of fashion. One of President Kennedy's first foreign trips was to Paris, and Jackie accompanied him, and there were thousands of people there to see him, and a lot of people were there simply to see her, simply to see what she was wearing. And Kennedy made a comment, I'm glad I accompanied the First Lady to Paris, because everyone was there to sort of see her fashion. So Americans sort of fell in love with the family, even though they might not have agreed with him politically. Americans were very excited to see a young family in office, have kids in the White House and things like that. This sort of mystique came to be known as Camelot. It sort of was picturesque and sort of something you would only see in, novels or fairy tales. And, not everything was perfect. He cheated on her numerous times while in office, before office. So it wasn't this perfect marriage, but Americans, at the time sort of looked past that. Kennedy will have a group of advisors that became known as the best and the brightest. Kennedy didn't care your political affiliation or actual sort of first-hand knowledge in the field. If you were good at something, he was going to get you into his administration. For example, this guy, Robert McNamara, Kennedy will ask him to be Secretary of Defense, and McNamara, who did serve in World War II, more as a computer analyst, basically said, Mr. President-elect, I don't know if I can be Secretary of Defense. I wasn't, I'm not a military guy. And Kennedy said, well, you ran Ford Motor Company. You know how to run a business. That's what I need. And so, Robert McNamara, took the job. So the people who surrounded Kennedy sort of became known as the best and the brightest. Like I'd mentioned at the top, Kennedy's domestic policies, which are here, come to be known as the New Frontier. Kennedy believed that the United States was onto something new. America really had always had something new to discover, whether it was cross the Appalachians, the Midwest, the West, the South, something new. For the first time, Americans didn't have something new to discover. And Kennedy believed it was going to be things like improving the economy, getting to the moon, civil rights. These were all things that became part of what was known as the New Frontier. Some other things. Kennedy will pass what is known as the Equal Pay Act. This is still something that is a hot topic today. There is not equal pay. But this was really the first time that the federal government was looking into making sure that men and women do get paid the same amount for the same job. President Kennedy will believe in deficit spending. Deficit spending is when you spend more than you have. Obviously, you can't do that for a long time. But Kennedy believed that it was something the United States could do in the 1960s. Now, obviously, we have a huge deficit. In 2000, 20 years ago, we did not have a deficit. We actually had a surplus. And in 20 years, we have gone from a surplus to, I think the national debt is 22 trillion, 23 trillion, 21, something in that general vicinity. So that's deficit spending. We are spending more as a country than we bring in. Civil rights, we've talked about civil rights. Kennedy believed it really wasn't the federal government's job to get involved in civil rights, and it wasn't until the incident in Birmingham with the kids, the Children's March, does Kennedy change his mind, and that's when the Civil Rights Act of '64 gets going. But he's not around for the completion of it. Kennedy was in favor of the space race. He believed getting to the moon was a priority for the United States, and in 1961 he said that the United States would get to the moon by 1970, and he was correct. In July of 1969, 6 years after his death, Neil Armstrong became the first man to walk on the moon, so Kennedy was correct in that. With regards to the space race, the United States basically lost every part of the space race to the Soviets except getting to the moon. They got the first item into space, which was Sputnik. They got the first creature into outer space. Remember the dog Laika. They got the first human into outer space, so forth and so on. And it's not until the end game here that we actually beat them. This picture here, Kennedy is signing the Equal Pay Act with, obviously surrounded by various women. You can see Vice President Lyndon Johnson back here. Which brings us to the end of the Kennedy administration, probably one of the more widely talked about, widely researched, widely skeptical topics in U.S. history, the assassination of President Kennedy. Kennedy, by late 1963, is thinking about re-election. Obviously, there would be an election in 1964. He wants to get re-elected, and he needs to make sure Southerners vote for him. Southerners are not really happy with him because of his change in civil rights. But Kennedy does have someone that can help him with the Southern vote, and that is his vice president. One of the reasons Kennedy picked Lyndon Johnson as his vice president is because he was from Texas. Kennedy and Johnson were the exact opposites. Kennedy was young, wealthy, Ivy League from, Massachusetts. Johnson was somewhat young, had been in politics for a number of years, was not rich or did not come from money, and he was obviously from Texas. So that's the main reason Lyndon Johnson is picked for the vice president. Now Kennedy is trying to use that to his advantage. So in November of 1963, he makes a trip to Texas to visit some of the major cities. And on November 22nd, 1963, he, along with the vice president and the first lady, are in Dallas, Texas. He's to give some speeches. And Kennedy, after arriving at the airport, decides, I want to go through downtown Dallas with the top down. I want people to see me. I don't want to be hidden, especially in this major southern city. I want the voters to see me. So Kennedy is basically driving through the center of Dallas when he is shot. He is shot by this man. His name is Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald is in the sixth floor of what is known as the Texas School Book Depository. It's a building. Oswald is in the sixth floor, and he fires 3 shots. The first shot misses. The second shot does the damage, and the third shot is known as, or is the head wound. Kennedy is basically dead on arrival when he arrives at the local hospital, which is called Parkland Memorial. He is pronounced dead, and basically Vice President Johnson, who is now being hidden in the hospital, protected in the hospital, is now President of the United States. Oswald is on the run that afternoon, and he is found hiding in a movie theater by the Dallas police. Oswald is charged with Kennedy's murder, and the next morning, Oswald is set to be moved from city jail to county jail. However, while he's being moved, this man, Jack Ruby, who was a nightclub owner and an affiliate of the local mafia, shoots Lee Harvey Oswald in the stomach, killing him. Ruby says he does it so Jackie Kennedy doesn't have to go through a long, brought-out trial for her husband's murder. Conspiracy theorists believe Ruby did it to shut Oswald up, because Oswald had been set up by somebody to take the fall for the murder. Now, who set who set Oswald up? Could be anyone. You talk to different people, that one might say it was the CIA. Someone might say it was Fidel Castro in Cuba. Others might say it was the mafia. Others might say it was the government itself, was tired of Kennedy. Others even blame Vice President Johnson. He had him murdered. So these are all conspiracy theorists. So new President Lyndon Johnson, he will have the government investigate the murder of the president. And what becomes known as the Warren Commission, comes to their findings. Their findings are basically Lee Harvey Oswald did the murder by himself. He fired 3 shots. The first shot missed. The second shot becomes known as this magic bullet. And a third shot is the headshot that basically kills the president. And Ruby, the Warren Commission finds that Ruby acts on his own. He is not a part of any big conspiracy. A lot of people do not believe that, but that's a different story for a different day. Here's sort of an outline of what happened that day. Fortunately, there was someone recording. Today everyone has pictures. Everyone has access to cameras and whatnot. So, but in 1963, video cameras were not that accessible. Well, someone did film it. His name was Abraham Zapruder, and he actually has footage of the Kennedy assassination. And if you go down here to some links, you will see what is known as the Zapruder film. If you watch that, you can see the actual footage of that day. Obviously, I wish we were in class because I could show it to you and go over it. But maybe we'll talk about it in class. The magic bullet theory. I usually show this in class. I usually actually recreate it. So I'm thinking if my children will cooperate with me for a few minutes, I'll try and recreate the magic bullet theory for you. Down here, this is when CBS News informed the country that the president was dead. This is the vice president being sworn in, and then Oswald being murdered the next day. These pictures, this first one, this is of Lyndon Johnson being sworn in as president. He is actually in Air Force One. Johnson refused to leave Dallas. He said, "I'm not leaving the city until I'm sworn in as president." And so they had to find someone to actually be able to do it. And so this woman here is a local justice of the peace, and she actually became the first woman to administer the presidential oath of office in history. Johnson's wife is here. She was on the trip with him to Texas, and here is Jackie Kennedy. Jackie Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson actually asked her to be in the picture. She agreed. A lot of people are trying to get her to change. You can't see here, but she basically has blood and brain stains on her. And Jackie basically told them, "Nope, I am not changing. I want the world to see what they did to my husband." President Kennedy's body is basically in a coffin in the back of the plane here. And this second picture, this was caught right at the moment that Jack Ruby, which would be here, shot Lee Harvey Oswald in the stomach, and then he was killed. This was a police officer that was escorting him along with this guy here. You can just really see his hat. But if you have a few minutes, definitely watch these videos. There's a lot of information about this. Again, one of my favorite topics to talk about. I wish we could do much more here, because once you guys watch this video on the magic bullet theory, some people will agree with it, some won't. And like I said, hopefully my children will cooperate, and maybe I can get a video to recreate the magic bullet theory. One more video will be on section 3. So that'll be coming. Make sure you answer the questions, and I'll see you guys later. Be good.